So in the last video, we introduced the idea of completing a readiness assessment based on the very specific behavior of adjusting insulin. And the outcome of the readiness assessment would allow you to categorize and communicate the level of readiness of your patient from green light go, yellow light ambivalent, and red light not ready. In this video, we'd like to help follow up with where you could guide the patient depending on the level of readiness. So why don't we begin with the circumstance where you believe that the patient is ready to begin adjusting insulin.
So instructions on how to self-adjust your insulin. Getting started. Think about this as a stepwise process to help get the results that you want. So it is important for your patient to know their blood glucose targets, and you want them to write this in because this is a way for them to even know if they know what their target values are. So this can tell you a lot of information about, do they even understand why they're adjusting their insulin and what are they trying to get it to. Then question number 2, know your result, know your insulin. When does your insulin work its hardest, and what blood glucose value or time does it affect? So this once again is allowing them to understand the insulin they take, the time they normally take it, and when it's working for. So then question 3, review your blood glucose values in your log over a period of 2 to 3 days. So this is where you either, whether they choose to write it down right at that moment, or if they go back into their meter memory and pull them out. So this is where they're looking for the patterns. So this is pattern management to see if from the time they take their insulin and where it's supposed to work, is their blood glucose value coming into the target that they previously set in question 1. So question 4, look for patterns of high or low values as they relate to your targets. For example, if your target is between 5 and 7 for breakfast and you are 3 to 4, you will need to adjust your insulin. Circle the values above that are below your target and mark those with an X that are above your target. So what do you do for low values? So that's when you want them to tick off that they're going to decrease their insulin. And what do you do for high values? And this is where you're hoping they're going to click off increase insulin. Question 5, it is important to always adjust for the low values first. And this is to remind them how to adjust. To adjust your insulin, you are looking for patterns with your blood glucose results. Remember your blood glucose targets and look for patterns. Usually adjust by no more than 1 to 3 units at a time. And then on the next pages, we'll have guidelines on how to do that adjustment. So one of the things that this sheet will do is also let you know how ready your patients are. So don't be surprised if they don't know the answers to put into each question. This will let you know perhaps just how ready they are and what you might need to go back to, or what you're going to have to help them learn to be able to do this process. So part 1, when starting one insulin, and this would be only one insulin, and you'd want them to write out the name, or you could write the name on. So the focus is on improving the breakfast bedtime blood glucose value. So you need to circle which one it is depending on the insulin you've started them on. And then remind them of what the blood glucose target will be at the time that they're trying to adjust this insulin for. So if it's a bedtime insulin and they're aiming for a breakfast blood glucose, then that's what you want to write in and circle. If it's a breakfast insulin and they're still aiming for a breakfast blood glucose, then that's what you want to put in. So guidelines for adjusting your insulin taken at breakfast or bedtime are listed below. So you would write in the name of their insulin. So part 1, when starting only one basal insulin, the goal is to improve the breakfast blood glucose values. The target, your blood glucose target at breakfast is, and you want them to write that in, and increase your breakfast nighttime insulin by how many units, how many days until your morning reading is whatever the target is you've set. If you experience a blood glucose less than, so that's when you're looking for the hypoglycemia, at breakfast, you will need to lower your dose by however many units. So if you do 1 or 2 until the low blood glucose stops. Then the next step, when your morning blood glucose levels are at whatever you've set the target to be, have them call their healthcare provider, and that's when you want to write your phone number in for next steps. So part 2, this would be when you're adding that mealtime insulin to their current basal insulin. So you want them to write in what that mealtime insulin is, or if you're going to write it in. And the focus is on improving your blood glucose values before your meal. So you want to write the targets again. So if you're just starting with one meal at first, or all meals, what their target should be before the meal. And then the guidelines for adjusting the name of that insulin taken at, and then circle the time that they take it, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or supper. So then in a table form again, the goal is to improve the blood glucose 2 hours after eating and before the next meal or nighttime, depending on the start of that mealtime insulin. The target, what their blood glucose target is before the meal, and then what their blood glucose target is 2 hours after the meal. If your blood glucose is higher than whatever they're aiming for 2 hours after eating, you want to tell them how much they should increase that mealtime insulin by and how often they should increase it until their 2 hour after meal blood glucose is at the target. So if they're filling this out with you, you're going to really see if they understand this concept or not. So hypoglycemia, if you're going low after a meal or before the next meal or nighttime, you may need to lower your breakfast, lunch, supper insulin by however many units until the low blood glucose stops. And then once again, the next steps, call your healthcare provider at your phone number, if they need any assistance with this.